excited to be here with some of the brightest minds in this space. We'll also have another panelist joining us soon, LDF. She's coming straight from the airport, so we're going to give her grace with tardiness. I'll start with a quick intro. My name is Parker. I work as an early stage VC. I'm also on the founding team of something called Boys Club. It's a community, it's a DAO, driving a new kind of culture in crypto. And there I primarily focus on the design and execution of our DAO. So yeah, I'm a big DAO nerd. Think about this space pretty much all day, every day. And one of the biggest things that has been on my mind is token-based voting, one of the most dominant governance systems in DAOs today, particularly in the DeFi space. I think, there's a lot of questions that come up with this phenomena. Is it efficient? Is it viable? Is it sustainable? Is it the best model? And why is it the most dominant model today? So during this discussion, we have some great panelists with us today. And I really want to dive into, first of all, just sort of why is this the dominant system? Why is this come about in this way? Does that necessarily mean it's the most efficient? And then go and dive in deeper to exploring opportunities for improvement within governance, as well as challenges that this system presents. And then finally, would love to discuss alternate models. And I think we have some great projects and ideas working on that space with us today. So I'm just going to start off by allowing each speaker to introduce themselves, what they're working on, and why they think they're here today.
Sure. So thanks, Parker, and thanks everybody here who participated in inviting me. I'm very grateful to be here. My name is Tara. I'm primarily a PhD researcher for Blockchain Gov, a European Research Council project, 5 years headed by Primavera de Filippi, looking very deeply at governance and blockchains and all sorts of topics associated with that. Specifically, I'm looking at this idea of exit to community. In Web3, a lot of people call it progressive decentralization. And I ask, how do we transition founder and investor-led startups into something that is truly community-owned and governed, ideally alongside cooperative principles and values? And as part of that research, I've been looking at DAO governance and specifically the idea of how do we design that for various different projects who are thinking about exiting to community and thinking very deeply about the issue of, is token voting, is that really the best thing for all of these projects to be choosing on that journey of progressively decentralizing, and very often coming to the opinion that no, it isn't. There's a lot in between that and what these communities want. I'm also a core contributor at MetaGov and have been doing quite a bit of research into Web3 labor conditions with other internet recently. So yeah.
My turn. Hi, everyone. I'm David Phelps. I had a previous company that we built the highest paying tutoring firm in the world. And the way we did that was to decentralize. So we made everybody an agent in the business so they could build each other's business as well. And we could take a much lower take rate while not incurring any of the churn and being able to get really, really high quality people as well who could command top rates and really kind of build almost like a guild-like system for making it very hard to get in. But once anyone was in, it was very easy for anyone to give each other business and to have incentives to build the underlying business and building each other's as well. And so when I started reading about DAOs, I got really excited because I was like, this is the model to be able to do exactly what I've already built a successful business doing. But there's this added unlock, which is this thing called tokens. And I was like, tokens are going to be this game changer because now you can crowdfund, right? Like now anybody's going to be able to get in, support a project early on. You don't have to go to VCs. You can have these smaller, companies that don't need to be $1 billion, big. And by having the token, it's just going to unlock all of this innovation and potential. And so I would say I probably spent the first 2 years of my own DAO work pretty excited by tokens. And the past year really became probably the biggest pivot I've had intellectually is really turning against them. And partly that's just legality. But I would say, there's other reasons too. So I founded a project, co-founded a project called Joke Race, where we are on-chain governance. And from day one, the things that really distinguished us were one, that we were 100% on-chain on any L2 EVM chain that you want. And two, that it wasn't focused just on the voting, it was focused on the submissions. So instead of just having a core team that puts a proposal to a community to vote on, it actually lets a bunch of people submit proposals and then vote on their favorites. And the idea was, we've lived in this paradigm where we've assumed that voting is the form of expression that everyone has because that's what we're used to from the countries we live in, where at a scale of 300 million people, you can't have everybody submitting proposals. So the way that they have voice is they vote. And my thought was, in DAOs in these smaller spaces, this is ridiculous. Like voting is not a very powerful form of expression. Submissions is a powerful form of expression. And so from day one, we really were trying to expand the space to allow submissions and allow that creative expression as a big piece of it, and then also be fully on chain. But the biggest innovation we've had was last week, where we launched our V3 and we went fully tokenless. And so I can talk more about that later. But it was really, really a big shift for us to say you can actually be totally on chain and there's no need for tokens at all in doing governance. And in fact, you can get a lot closer to the kind of systems I used to build where it's very, very hard to get in, but once you're in, anybody can do what they want. It's like that old Studio 54 quote about dictatorship at the door, democracy inside. And so, yeah, that's a lot of what I'm personally excited by.
That's actually pretty cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Elco. I've been, for the last probably 2 years or some, behind the DAOist with different other people in different moments in time. But I think the most interesting role I can kind of broadcast in this situation is I was literally the first person in the world who made all my income working for a DAO. And back when the first DAO that reached governance stage that wasn't the DAO was Genesis DAO from DAOstack, and I was kind of the first guy who showed up. I have a background in, kind of like David, I was in this type of systems before, but in activism in South America and working as organizational developer and consultant. But I was very tech allergic. And what made me cross that frontier was trying to survive in Berlin as an immigrant with almost no money and no citizenship and just having no legitimacy, not actual spiritual legitimacy, but contextual legitimacy to participate in any of the economical games around me. And yeah, Genesis DAO saved me. So they've acquired a very hungry and desireful contributor. So in less than 3 months, I created the DAO canvas, and then I had this weird experience of going to workshop at DevCon where my CEO didn't even wasn't even there. He was there, but he wasn't even speaking, and things just went on from there. And I think, I agree, maybe in this panel specifically, because it's very anti-token, I can actually put the hat of the moderate position. But in the end of the day, my issue is not with the token base. My issue is also with the voting. I think it's not a interesting enough mode of expression. And I have this vision for DAOs as fuzzy social graphs that mix education, entertainment, and work. And they're programmatic, and they require ever less permission as long as you play through a well-scaffolded sort of interaction set that is always on chain, and it's almost like a game, almost like you play any RPG on a computer, but these are in real life. I'm very interested in those. I have many, many, many ideas and zero time to build them because the current, let's say my set of allowed performance space is mostly as ritual designer doing things like this that walk the blade of of being a conference, but being a weirdly, it's whatever you think the DAOist is what I've been doing basically. And I kind of respect and love this opportunity deeply. At the same time, I really wanted to be able to go towards these other ideas that I have. And this panel all the panels in this event came together from people that I deeply admire and I wanted to spend more time together with that are having the opportunity to do these things. And I am far beyond having any jealousy or any pain at this point. I'm just so glad to see sort of these things actually happening. But also have good news. Our missing panelist just joined
I'm
us.
so sorry, everyone.
Perfect timing. We're just giving quick introductions of who you are, what you're working on, what you've worked on, and your relation to DAOs, and like why you think you're here today.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry I went to the wrong venue straight off the plane.
And
So
we found Shifi.
yeah, of course. Yeah, I had to make a quick pit stop, I guess, but in true chaotic fashion, a little bit fashionably late. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I definitely echo like this group of people is someone that even an hour and a half to spend with you guys is like definitely not enough. So I'm LDF. I do a bunch of different things, try to like keep myself from being put into a box of like what I work on, but I'm a contributor at Boys Club. I'm also a co-steward of the Joke Council community, and yeah, just participate in a bunch of fun, weird, interesting experiments. Often feeling like DAOs are most true to themselves when they don't like even call themselves a DAO, it feels like. So it's been really fun kind of coming from the traditional, I used to work at Reddit and Facebook before that, and so watching kind of internet communities take shape and form without needing kind of some of the incentive mechanisms that we're now playing around with has been really fun to just kind of expand the toolkit of different things that we now can use, but really just looking at kind of expressed preference versus like stated preference is definitely one of the most fun things I think that we get to experiment with now. So yeah, really just watching things come to fruition instead of trying to force them to happen a certain way is kind of my bread and butter.
Awesome. I'm super excited that
Thanks for sharing.
on one hand, I think, we have such a diverse group of backgrounds and experiences, but united by common threads. I think one kind of contextual piece of information that could be helpful to share on my interest in DAOs and how that emerged is I'm a reformed social justice warrior. I used to be really into, and still am really into, community organizing and mobilization. So you could think of decentralized in real life movements as a form of that. Occupy Wall Street is one great example. And I've always been really interested in this, question and idea of how do we empower communities to coordinate and mobilize to achieve their goals, particularly unrepresented communities or historically marginalized communities, and how does that inform and shape law and culture and vice versa. So that's sort of where the governance piece, I think, comes in. So it seems like one, common thread, just hearing a bit about each of, each of our backgrounds, is that DAOs are sort of a natural next step to this interest and question of how do we better empower and mobilize communities. So obviously the DAO space is very well developed today. And I think we've come a long way, since DAOs were founded. And I'm sure all of us on this panel, as well as everyone in this room and at this conference, are aware of many of the different mechanisms and systems and designs and forms that DAOs can take. But I think oftentimes within the DAO space, we have a bit of blindness to the normative mental models for other people in the crypto and DeFi space particularly. I think one great example and anecdote that I'll give of this is, as an early stage VC, I work with a lot of founders, oftentimes founders that are building protocols and using DAOs or a form of DAOs as their sort of organizational method. And one of the founders I was talking to that's very early stage was talking to me about designing their governance system. And I said, what governance mechanism are you going to use? And they said, token-based voting. I said, have you considered, using anything else? And they said, well, what else exists, right? So like within the DAO space, like we have like a great awareness of all of these alternate and emerging, mechanisms and different ways of doing things. But I really think it's important to, establish a shared understanding as we, move into the rest of this discussion as well, that is, I would say, typically not the case for most of the people in this space. So I'm curious, just to sort of kick things off, why do we think, and I'll give one statistic really quick to sort of drive this home, is that Chainalysis put out this report in 2022 that showed that on average, less than 1% of token holders hold 90% of governance power within most DAOs. So why do we think this is the case today? I think, there's a shared understanding and viewpoint, it seems, that, can we actually keep that door open? Thank you. There's a shared viewpoint, it seems, and opinion across these panelists that token-based voting maybe is not the best way. But putting that aside for a moment, whether that's true or not, why is it the most dominant form of governance today? How did this happen? And yeah, why are we at this point today?
Can I list the obvious things really quick, just so? Well, I think first one is like first mover advantage is huge, right? There's early contributors and just being at such a new thing, just getting to know it first. There's such a large advantage. That's why so many VCs are like spray and pray. It helps. Second, one of the reasons I think is that power distribution is very poorly visualized. We don't have cybernetics at governance, which is where I would definitely spend all my time if I had nothing else to do. So if I have a design for a way that you look at a DAO and a 9-year-old can see how power is distributed, I call it the pedal. It's very obvious. I don't know why people haven't built it yet. Probably some technical issues. So yeah, power can't be visualized. First mover advantage is really, really, really easy. Token-based voting is preferred because it is how it came to be, right? The CEO, the community offering, the capacity of attracting capital that it's not from VC. It was actually considered very revolutionary when it showed up. That's why you were excited about it for 2 years. I think we only started realizing the opportunities for like dark misalignment in these sets when the whole airdrop stuff started happening. So yeah, those are the obvious ones I wanted to get out of the way so you guys don't have to do it. And then.
Yeah, I think the other one is just skeuomorphism. Like we are so used to modeling our governance systems off of what we are familiar with, and what we are familiar with are nation states and corporations. And so nation state is not token-based governance, but it is just what I talked about before, that the only way you have say is through voting. And so that becomes the default. Like the idea that you can actually have say through submissions and proposals and referendums, it just doesn't exist at scale because you can't do that with 300 million people. So I think that's one piece. But I think especially it's a corporate model that has really dominated how we've set up DAOs. We've always referred to DAOs being the future of work. We never refer to them as the future of entertainment. We don't refer to them as the future of play or of communities or of friendship or of social life, even though that's actually what they've been really good for. We refer to them as the future of work, which is actually something they've been very bad for. And so we have adopted this corporate model where traditionally there will always be a board that has to vote on decisions from what is effectively a core team of the founders. So the founders go to the board, and maybe sometimes they go to the shareholders. And that's where it gets interesting, because if you think, a token is equivalent in some ways to a stock, so you're buying a share, and now you have this governance power. to exert. It's what we've always done in the stock market. It makes sense you would do it here. But of course, corporations, first of all, haven't really operated that way because there's a difference between common and preferred stock in terms of who has governance rights. And there's also a difference of the board itself having much more say typically than shareholders too. But we've just imitated this entire system, assuming that this is how we should build. And I think that's a piece of it. I do also think at some point I would like to make a compelling case for tokens because I do think it is worth keeping in mind, what the pro is here. If you have a proof of stake system, if you have Solana or Ethereum or Arweave, where you actually do need a token that's providing economic security and is being collateralized in order to therefore be staked, validated, slashed. It is really important then that those are your shareholders, like those are the people, right? So I do think there is a case for something like token-based voting with a system like Ethereum, Solana, Arweave, even though none of them actually use token-based voting. But when you're not using tokens for economic security, in the situation of a DAO, that's again a place where I think we've just copied what was there. We copied the systems of the L1s, we copied the systems of corporations, we copied the systems of nation states instead of asking ourselves, wait, what's the unlock here? Like the unlock in many ways is that the permissionlessness of anybody who meets certain criteria being able to join. Why would those criteria be tokens? And what is the unlock? That this is also, like, DAOs can be very small, and that's a huge unlock for being able to have creative participation, because you can just participate much more in a group of 10 than you can in a group of 300 million people too. And so that's really all goes to the first mover advantage kind of point. It's just like we copy what's come before us instead of stepping back and saying, wait, why would we do this?
Maybe I can jump in here and speak from my little researcher stool. And put this a little bit into context or actually myself and Rolf Höfer, who's also speaking here at some point, is a great...
Such a perfect German pronunciation.
Yeah, of course. Well, myself and Rolf, we wrote a paper recently titled Institutional Isomorphism in Web3, and that maybe is a little bit of a concept that frames some of the things that you both have been describing and kind of gives answers to the questions of why are we all doing this? Why are we imitating? Why are we imitating from the outside, be it the state or the corporation? But why is this imitation also perpetuating on the inside? And the first thing I think that's interesting to note here is that this idea of isomorphism, or the question is not in DAOs, but across organizational fields. So looking at hospitals, looking at management consultancies, looking at schools, why do we see in various different contexts these organizations starting to resemble each other? So management consultancies having that model of project-based work, a project lead, whatever, however they set up, and they start using the same tools, they start, the brands look alike, whatever it is. Why does that happen? And this field of research has been asking that question across other fields, and there's, broadly speaking, 4 reasons. One of them, and I'm going to take that one out in Web3 or in the DAO space because I don't think we know enough yet, is just competition. So the argument being that some organizational forms just seem to thrive better in the market and they outcompete other organizational forms, therefore the market kind of acting as a selecting force. I don't think we're at that point yet in the DAO space. We don't really know what we're doing here. Some of the time.
Pepe is the most valuable community.
Of course, yeah. No, he's our patron of the internet. Yeah. Keke. And then the other aspect of isomorphism is what we call institutional isomorphism. This is maybe a little bit more interesting when we think about why is token-based governance such a thing. And here the argument goes that actually there's nothing competitively superior about certain modes of organizing that we choose, but it's 3 other factors that are driving them. The first one being pressure from the outside. So this could be the regulator saying only certain ways are allowed. You have to do the Cayman Trust Foundation model. You have to be incorporated in the Colorado Co-op, whatever. These kinds of legal entity forms that we're also choosing, and that kind of indicate a little bit of how we should be then structuring our governance. So there's the outside pressure. There's the idea of professionalization. It depends where the people who are building these DAOs come from. If all of them come from statecraft and public governance, well, it's likely they're going to imitate systems that they know from there. If they all come from big corporations and shareholder governance, well, it's likely we're going to adopt those. If they all come from big Web 2 companies, there is a certain way of working that is maybe agile and, You have the nice big company headquarter, whatever, you are going to try and imitate that. That's not a bad thing. It just goes to say that if we want to change something, it might be good to try and increase overall diversity, not just in terms of gender or that sort of thing, but also in terms of professional backgrounds in this space to discover what is there beyond token-voted governance. And the third aspect, and that's maybe the biggest one, is mimetic isomorphism is what they call it, is uncertainty. So when we operate in a space where neither for the space do we have one clear goal identified of what do we want to do here, nor for the individual organization, I think it's a recurring problem that people come into a DAO and then at some point there's a conflict around like, what are we even doing here? People look to the outside and try and imitate structures that they believe have been successful. And I think, frameworks such as Moloch DAO, rage quitting functions, the idea of using Discord as like a great tool for discourse, I don't know. There's things that we all agree are not optimal, but we keep doing it and we keep seeing it be imitated. And just this uncertainty sort of being a driving factor of that. And I think it's interesting to think of like how isomorphism has played out in other organizational fields to kind of understand what sort of environmental conditions can we create to make sure that we're not going down the path of recreating industries that we're trying to, be done with. Yeah.
I love it. Just to not try and repeat, because I totally agree with everything that's been said here. I think it's really exciting to see us almost like start to graduate beyond this thinking, right? To run into this ceiling of, okay, we understand now why like introducing a token or having an incentive structure makes sense in general, but what are we governing, right? Like, again, if we're only governing the token itself, then sure, token-based voting makes sense. But now, as we're trying to coordinate a group of people around achieving other types of outcomes, it can become a hindrance really quickly. And so I think it's really cool to start to see, I know the term like proto-DAOs has been starting to take shape a little bit more, but almost relieving ourselves from the burden of starting with the token and the DAO of the DAO, and instead saying, how do we take these principles that we've learned from all of these different experiments that have happened and maybe not have the overhead of being backed into a specific model that we've already launched and committed to, and instead like add those things later. So again, Boys Club for me has been one of those communities for the past couple of years, people would ask me like, what do you think is one of the most well-run like Web3 organizations? And people would be surprised that they don't have a token. And it's like, I really think that would have hurt some of the, organic development that has helped the community figure out who they are to then figure out how to incentivize that behavior instead of, like you said, getting 6 months to a year in and saying, wait, what are we actually doing here again? So I totally agree with everything that's been said, but it does feel like we are starting to move beyond that, which is really exciting.
Definitely, yeah. I think to zoom out a little, I kind of want to dive deeper into this question of we're operating in this conversation, right, under the assumption that token-based voting is bad, but I don't think we've actually really clarified why we think that and our positionality on it. David, I'd love to start off with you and just ask a little more about. You mentioned that your views like changed on it over time, and initially you were excited about it. So what changed for you?
Yeah, well, one was realizing that you don't have to do things on-chain with a token. It was just an assumption I made. I was like, oh, on-chain means token. It's like, Bitcoin starts with a token, and then you kind of figure out a blockchain to distribute it, my assumption was, yeah, the token is the data primitive of blockchains, and that's not true. Tokens are not the data primitives of blockchains. There are plenty of other transactions you can be doing that are non-tokenized as well. So partly it was just miseducation on my part for years in not realizing this isn't a necessity, right? And this isn't a limitation of the system. But I think most of all, what you just continually see happen is that people who can buy their way into power are first of all not necessarily the people you want in your community, right? Let's say that, but actually it creates negative incentives. So you look over and over again if a treasury is worth a certain amount of money, and let's say in USDC, it's worth $100 million, and the token is worth a set price, the token is an allocation of the treasury that could command it, right? So the token is a set share of that treasury. At some point, there will be a mismatch between these two values, between where the token is valued and where the treasury is valued. So in other words, where the proportionate value of the treasury for a given token is now less than the actual value of the treasury. And when that happens, you will have very crafty buyers come in who will buy up the token so that they can then rug the treasury and take it out. And so, the big example of this that everyone got really angry at this year was Aragon. The example nobody wants to talk about is Nouns. This is happening in Nouns right now. Nouns, initially was like at 80 ETH, per noun or so. It's come down over time, so it's now like 25 ETH. What that means is the average noun is worth something like 40 ETH. So if you buy a 25 ETH noun, you're getting 40 ETH of the treasury. So what is happening right now? There are people who are buying up 25 ETH nouns every single day until they're going to have a majority of the treasury, at which point they plan to rug it. And they've been open about this, right? Any token system is going to be susceptible to this at some point. So, I think first of all, it's just saying, well, let's expand our view. If you want token voting, you can do that, and that's one option. But why not have all these other options where you could gate based on social behaviors? What have you done, in our community? Like, how have you contributed? How have you gotten attestations? Has our community voted for you to be part of us and welcomed us in, right? Not using a token to do that, right? There's all these other systems you can have for permissioning that are based on social incentives, right? But I think even leaving that aside, if you do have the token, you do face this fundamental arbitrage challenge, and no community has been safe from this at all, which is kind of shocking to look at and realize that that's still something nobody wants to talk about.
I can go and take it a little bit abstract again from the idea of why is token weighted voting bad? I don't think it necessarily is. Actually, I think there's a lot of cases where it's actually quite good. But for me, it's around, so in projects like Nouns, it's brought in an influence around a project that was really around for itself and maybe for, funding projects that this community supported, sort of thing. But now there's this whole dynamic which is drawing away attention that we need to deal with, where governance is actually not serving the purpose of the community but distracting heavily from it. So I think this idea of governance matching purpose is one that's super important. And when we think about the purpose first of what are we trying to achieve here, then sometimes it makes sense to implement these token voted systems, sometimes it doesn't. The way that again, we've recently written about this together with Primavera, have been thinking about how to think maybe around the types of governance systems that you want to choose, is to understand that token voting and building economic incentive systems and game theory modeling, augmented bonding curves, what have you, that's really good when you're when your project is all about maintaining or building something that requires a high degree of confidence from the people around you, so that people, investors or users or whoever, can be very, very confident that this thing is going to work exactly how you say it's going to work. And I can look at the underlying technology, I can understand the incentives around it, and be highly confident that, there's only a very tiny chance that it wouldn't work like that. I think this type of thinking is important when we think about L1s, right? Anything like a mining or a staking mechanism for Ethereum and Bitcoin works that way. We need these technical guarantees, otherwise nobody is confident enough to use it. I think on the DAO level, it also works for protocols such as Uniswap or, DEXs, any sort of DeFi protocol thing that is trying to build and maintain a critical infrastructure for the entire ecosystem. Again, there's something to be said to build governance that builds a high degree of confidence that this thing will work and act exactly in the same way. It's very different when you're talking about building a community, and if your DAO's purpose is something around, we want to bring together women, we want to bring together joke lovers, we want to host a party in Paris, we want to, whatever that is. If you then go in and over-engineer these governance systems and add tokens and economic incentives to rug them, well, it's highly likely that that's very much going to distract from the trust-based purpose that your DAO actually consists of, because communities do rely on that high sense of trust. And as LDF was saying, decisions get made without tokens being
But do you
used.
mind if I make a point
please.
of why that's awesome? Like the situation in Aragon and Nouns, which the attack vector is similar, but the situation to the community is completely different, I think. I think for me, as somebody who is looking at this as an infinite game, these situations are super welcome. First, because we are all learning about like the rateability of treasures and what to do when price go down. We became really good at what to do when price go up. We haven't built community immunity for what to do when price go down, so we really need to go through this. Second, none of these rugs has happened yet, right? So these people are fucking like shorting, like socially shorting something and dumping all this capital into a system that is most likely capable to self-regulate and stop that rug. Sorry guys, I know you're sponsors, but I have to say the truth. I don't think Aragon would manage if the attack is well designed, and I don't think Nouns is going to be rugged. Because we can implement systems where the weight of the voting changes, like the system has to be self-regulating. If the system is incapable of reacting to outside stimuli, yeah, the system is going to self-destruct. If the system is completely petrified, that's why we have on-chain governance in the first place, is to be able to tamper with the rules and move the knobs and fucking adapt to the situations, which is something that MetaFactory, much less relevant, has been able to do more or less over the years. MetaFactory is a very, very early adopter of token voting, but with a lot of different things about it. It's not that relevant anymore, but it was an early adopter. I know a lot about it because I was there. I was employee number one. But so let's see if these rugs actually happen. And I think these failure modes are very welcome, especially if they're almost
As a
failure
researcher,
modes.
I fully agree.
Well, aren't we all researchers though? Is
Of
it
course.
the only difference? The
learning.
only difference is the type of skin in the game we have. I don't know. I just like disaster. Just
Can I just say, I don't want to go too deep into the weeds here.
oh, you're more than welcome.
So for nouns, it's actually really interesting. I've talked to people deep in nouns, and I was like, well, there's actually a mechanism built into nouns where nounders, which has centralized control, so they can veto anything. So they can totally overrule this. And I was like, that's what you guys will do. You'll just overrule this rug, right? And they said, no, we're not going to. And I said, why? And they said, because we want the token to be trading at a fair value and for people to trust the mechanics of the project. So if these people take half the treasury out and they go out, we think it's going to build more trust for the project, for people to all realize that they need to bid higher prices for the tokens because that's what they're worth. And that blew my mind. And I think it actually could happen, but it could happen exactly for the reason of saying, that's what they would argue, is to say we want this to happen because we think this is going to prevent arbitrage in the future, because they'll be like Uniswap. Once people see that, they'll immediately trade it back up to the fair value of the token.
Yeah, I guess like it. Well, first, this is all 2 giga brain for me. I'm just a painter, sculptor who makes events, but whatever. But what it feels to me is just like a very slow motion AMM.
Yeah.
It's like a slow motion social AMM.
one of those
Yeah.
You have to have 40 ETH, so it's
Yeah,
not
this is-
easy for anybody just to do that.
So it's literally like we're building the ecology, like autonomous ecology. Shout out Stellar, you should be here. Why didn't we coordinate the dates of this shit? But it's literally like we're building the soil of the forest and the leaves and the fox and the mycelia and then the plants, and then some trees are becoming larger and then some fruitify. Like, it's literally like none of these things that feel uncomfortable at the time scale that we're talking, which is since I'm here 5 years and there was like one DAO and this, it's hyper accelerated actually. I think if things actually have failure modes and slowed down and we have people like Tara looking at them and we're building this hyper semantic knowledge set that allows like the people who get into DAOs today, they come at a level of knowledge that I remember when DeFi Summer came, all the OGs were just like trying to calculate how the fucking pools worked, and we were on calls like just how does this shit work, and I was the stupidest one, so it took me a little bit. But, so I'm actually like I see all these things, but I just wanted to put a little bit of sparkle and glitter on them because it's pretty cool to have the opportunity to see these things almost fail not so much, fail some, but not like destroy. And the people, as you said, they're super rich. So like it's sort of like a like sports car thing. Like people just want to go like and I think they're doing it as a great service for gambling with yeah.
But I do want to say, like, even though I value failure or learning from failure, it's also feels a little bit like this sort of, like the treasury value and the voting, like the token voting value being out of balance and there being like governance attacks and that sort of thing. This is not a new idea, and maybe we're seeing it more like playing out more in real life. There's also the question, is it a failure or is it actually a thing that will build legitimacy in the long run?
We're about to attack, it will never rebalance.
Exactly, but in my opinion, there is a responsibility for people who have been experiencing or studying this to say, like, guys, if you introduce tokens and voting for a treasury, you run the risk of this being gamified. This sort of attack vector is well known. It is happening in real life, however slow or fast. And there are alternatives. Like you could do, the joke race, the way I understand it, is build confidence on the outside so you can build trust on the inside. And then use like non-token weighted sort of governance mechanisms. Let's try that. Let's figure out new ways of failing instead of like sitting or standing at the sidelines. That would make me really annoyed, and watching the same predictable pattern happen again and again.
I'm excited to be building on the front lines of failure. We're
Same.
gonna fail in ways we've never failed before. Yeah. Get ready. Yeah. You thought you knew failure. You haven't until you've seen Joke Race V3.
Disruptive failure.
Yeah, disruptive failure.
No, but I think her contribution was great to take us in the positive direction. Like we
Totally.
attacked tokens, and then we talked about how maybe it's not so bad, but going in a positive direction. And I will just apologize because really need to go to the bathroom. If it wasn't really needed, I wouldn't.
Yeah. Take breaks too.
No, I think one of the other things that you've brought up a couple of times, which I totally agree with, is like, I know everyone's saying token weighted voting is bad, but it's more so like it's not enough, right? Like one size fits all is never going to work for all of the different use cases. Like if someone says they're starting a DAO today, like we have 15 follow-up questions of what that actually means or what that looks like and how to optimize for exactly what the purpose of the organization is in the first place. And like social consensus is still very much driving a lot of these decisions, right? Like even with joke races, like I've had to deploy second contests and we've had to just as a community be like, we're trusting this one. Don't submit to the other one. If you do, you're rugging yourself. You're not rugging yourself necessarily out of money. Maybe you are if your joke was amazing and you were going to win, but like you can have other purposes. So like, yeah, the failure coming faster is actually more of like a benefit to the community as opposed to everyone kind of speculating on if you're going to get rugged or not by some random outsider, right? So again, I just think it's cool to be able to graduate to that point to say we're not totally reliant on this treasury, which is the only asset that we have to govern as a group.
I want to say something else, which is like if you think about real world models for where you buy friendship, like, where do we have a model where it's like you have a community and you're like, well, you should buy your way into this community to be my friend. And those do exist, and they're actually really successful. So like Ferraris is like an NFT community. Every Ferrari is unique. It's an NFT. But they do permission it. It's very hard to get. You have to go to parties around the world. There has to be a social basis before you're allowed to buy, right?
Sororities and frats.
But country clubs, right? And so you start to notice like a couple things with these, right? One is that, yeah, you can buy your win, but there's also a social piece, right? And so like FWB, I think, is like a really good example of doing something like that on chain, where it's like anybody can buy the token, but you still have to pass some sort of, entrance exam socially to be admitted. And there's totally a basis for something like that. Like we've seen it work in the real world, like art galas, you get to go because you bought your way into the art gala, right? But what all those things have in common is that those are for the richest people in the world. Like all of those communities work really effectively because they are designed for multi-billionaires who want to be with other multi-billionaires and build business opportunities with them, and therefore permissioning it based off of wealth is actually a really good thing for them because their goal in being there is to be with other rich people. And you look at what crypto has been to date, and it's been totally the playground for rich people. And so it makes sense also that we have these kinds of systems where we haven't been able to really scale any of this to like mass users. What it's been really good at as a user base is appealing to really, really rich people. And so what would really rich people want to do? They'd want to meet other really, really rich people. And so we've created a perfect system for it with token-based governance. And it works well, and it's totally effective. And we can totally imitate the country clubs and the Ferraris of the world. But I also want to say that's not 99% establishment of communities that anybody in the world wants to belong to or could belong to. And if we want to build those, we have a scalability issue the same way that we have a scalability issue with NFTs and with DeFi and with everything else to reaching mass users. And and buying your way into a system is fundamentally a way to ensure this is only going to operate for really, really rich people. It's a great use case, but it's a very limited one.
I think one quick response, like building on that, right, is actually there's extremely high levels of adoption of crypto in emerging markets.
Totally.
For real world use cases. But are those people using DAOs? No. And so I think there is like
Are they joining FWB,
Right,
like,
right.
in the Philippines, right?
I think there's like a important kind of distinction to make here, right? Of like crypto in many ways today is serving the underserved in the world, but our DAOs, no. DAOs are very Western, and they're for, things that are not necessarily like crucial for the quality of everyday life. They're more recreational, as we've seen them today. And I kind of want to draw out one thing I'm hearing like throughout the past few minutes of this discussion, which is I think we're all in agreement that experimentation is good, failure is good, gathering more data points is good. But what the fuck is the point if we're not learning, right? Like frankly, like we're on the broader scale, I would argue we're not learning, right? Most people don't even know that there are alternate systems to token-based voting, nor are they like widely adopted yet. And I think Joe Grace is one great example of moving forward in that direction. But I'd really love to, draw part of this conversation, not just to like, okay, why is token-based voting maybe not the best mechanism, or why do we need more mechanisms? But like, okay, what do we do from here, right? Like, we could sit around all day and like complain about token-based voting, but like, what are the actionable next steps, and what are the gaps that maybe we're not seeing to raise more awareness? And I think, David, you had this great term earlier of like this miseducation in the space. I think there's like a fundamental lack of awareness and lack of accessibility to information about alternate mechanisms in this space that might just be like a baseline of propelling forward, the direction that I think we're all in agreement maybe isn't the best direction forward. So I'd love to sort of just prompt, like, how do we raise more awareness around this? What alternate mechanisms exist today? But like, where's the gap, right? Like, even with the alternate mechanisms that exist today, where is the gap that something's not connecting, right? Where most people in crypto don't know about these things, and how do we bridge that gap? And David, I'd love to invite you to talk more about Joe Grace too.
Sure. So I think, what's exciting is that there will be all new types of communities that form, and as they are successful, then other people want to imitate them. But it requires new forms of experimentation. So the way it works for Joke Race is you can allow list who gets to submit proposals, you can allow list who gets to vote. And so within that structure, you can imagine doing stuff like hackathons, a bunch of people submit, just a small jury votes. You can do grants processes entirely through it. People submit applications for a grant, just a small jury votes, they get rewards. You could also do traditional governance where it's the opposite, a small group proposes, and then a larger community picks their favorites, or they could be the same, or they could be different. And so you can run all of DAO governance through this. You can do prediction market games, like there's just a lot of fun things that you can do with this. But I think where it'll get exciting is when people start being allow listed to participate in a contest where maybe they can win thousands of dollars, right? And they're allow listed based on social behaviors of things that they've done online. So maybe that's attestations that they've gotten, but maybe it's on-chain activity, that they've used a protocol before and they've been a meaningful user, and so that's what's actually, allocating them power to submit and to vote. as well. And maybe it's off-chain actions. And I think this is a really exciting space to think about, which is that, if you can map an off-chain action to an on-chain address, you can suddenly allow this people based on any other activity across the entire internet. So, this is a problem of gated APIs. This is why I think Web3 will destroy Web2, because it is hard to do this in Web2, and it's very easy to do this in Web3. But being able to say, you followed me on Twitter, so you get to participate in this contest, to win $10,000. Well, now you've created incentive for a lot of people to follow you on Twitter, right? In order to participate, in order to have that opportunity. And so you can start creating these like social incentive loops that I think will be really powerful for community building, while also, it goes both ways. It's both gating it to the people you actually want, but it's also pulling a lot more people in that couldn't have participated before. Too. And so it's both blocking people out, but it's also inviting a lot of people in. And I think that's where it gets really exciting, because we've been bad at both those things.
One of the other things that I think is really an exciting space, like as you mentioned, in terms of like miseducation, I think there's actually like a misalignment between like the group of people that we're talking to and the group of people that these tools actually empower the work that they're already doing. So again, like you get a bunch of crypto people in a room and you talk about like new governance structures. We're still like kind of recreating the same. Like, do we need 50 DAOs that do the exact same thing with the same 20 people? Probably not. And I think one of the mistakes we've made the most was treating the software that we're creating as like a B2B software play for organizations, right? Like, if I'm selling country club software to manage memberships for the 500 people that are a member of my golf club, my life is really not meaningfully different if those actions are on chain or not. But if I'm a really, really valuable contributor to a community and I want to be able to participate in a bunch of different spaces and carry that reputation around with me, or spin things up and find people that I align with and go create a new community where my needs are met, that is a way more interesting design space to me when you think about like the individual contributor that makes up these communities. Because as you mentioned, like right now we're building tools for a bunch of rich people who are the members of these clubs. Who's running the club? Like they're not going to go actually like manage the community. And that's why we see a lot of like turnover with contributors that are really, really high value, because they are both showing up as the organization itself and also the people who are a member. And so that's to me like the most interesting thing is, how am I being able to leverage all of the good work that I've done in one community or another? How am I incentivized to keep showing up and participating, not because I got into one club, but because of all of the other things that are going to open doors when I meet someone here and then I meet someone over here, and like we kind of form our own community. So I'm really excited for all of the even just pop-up organizations that are able to accomplish things with funds, with reputation, globally, and they don't need to exist forever. As you mentioned, like a lot of the treasury that management that we're doing right now is around protocols that are meant to last forever, but communities don't necessarily need to. And that's why, to me, like joke races are so cool, because you can almost look at the community that formed out of people taking certain actions instead of gating the actions to a smaller group of people.
Maybe I just want to add to, because you also mentioned the golf club, and it's like, does this meaningfully change if I do it on chain? Like, no, probably nothing. And just responding to the question, like, how do we increase the education and awareness for these other modes of governance? For me, one of the things is to stop talking about governance like it's this highly complex technical issue that only a full stack developer with 20 years of experience at the biggest, most famous protocols can ever speak towards, and understand that governance is something deeply human that every child knows how to do. Like last year I sat in a workshop with a bunch of kids at DWeb Camp, and we asked them, like how would they think about running their school if they were in charge? And they had a lot of great ideas and rules and secondary rules, and they were like third graders shouldn't be able to say anything because they're too little and stuff like that. And it was just like, okay, these kids know exactly how to do governance, how to do meta-governance, how to do accountability, how to do transparency. All of these things are, we're quite good at it as humans. And I think, so starting from that, and then the second thing being to realize that we have these technologies, we have these tokens and ledgers, and there's a lot of things that they enable us to do. However, it's up to us to know that we can leverage all those primitives and the tokens and the security and the on-chain elements if we think that is good for our golf club. But we don't have to. Nobody's forcing us to, do purely on-chain golf clubs from now on. And we're allowed to think about all other modes of governance that we've come across in each of our lives, in the various contexts that we partake in.
I think in the most abstract level, the change we're seeing here is that, so in the beginning, in the way back when machine, and when it's like DAOstack launched first. Aragon was the first one to raise. DAOstack launched first. Then Aragon launched, and there was this big tribal war between DAOstack people and Aragon people. So people, in the beginning, there was not a lot of DAOists, and they were very identified whatever tooling was under it. And there was a very big overlap between the users and the employees, right? Now you will 100% understand why this is called the DAOist and not the DAOs, or how to DAO or anything like that. Because now we have a class of allegianceless agents who are motivated by whatever it is that motivates them, be it fun, be it profit, be it a combination, be it inspiration, be it to actually annoy other people, which is an incredibly powerful motivator that should not be ignored. That actually, the fuzziness of DAOs is actually coming through. So at the most abstract level, what I would like people to get is that DAO technology creates the possibility of, it's not about the golf club, it's not about the school. The organization has a fuzzy boundary. It is actually a strange attractor of social meaning and practice that changes as it moves over the edge, and then it overlaps the other edge, and then it creates a fractal overlapping set of practices, beliefs, preferences, etc. And then as we get the IRL aspect communicating with it, we are gonna get to these I grew up, I'm both giving away my age and the fact that I come from a South American country and that entertainment was far and lacking because I was the youngest, so it was not my video game. I grew up with those Ian Livingstone books, like Choose Your Own Adventure, and then I drew those things. I think we're gonna, I think the coolest version of DAOs is, or at least the next version of DAOs is gonna be, you pay to participate, you have something that feels like a token-based voting, but what actually makes your token meaningful is how you develop it through a Tamagotchi sort of weird-like adventure where you stake that one and you get the other one after you accomplish something, blah, blah, and you're going to have this programmatic adventure that both develops you as a professional, a person, makes you money, makes you fun, finds friends, and also defines what spaces you're going to have access to. And I don't even know if the metaverse is going to be a part of this because I actually couldn't give a flying fuck about the metaverse. But I know some people really, really, really do.
Just call it the metaverse. You're good.
Yeah. No, I like tomatoes, and I like my plants, and I like doing things with my hands.
The cat in the corner.
Is the cat still? Oh man, I'm gonna go sit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so for me, it's all about felt transformation and direct experience, right? I'm not I'm very abstract thinker, but a concrete actor, and because I don't have education, I don't have a college degree, blah 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 blah. By choice, I could have done it anyway. So I hope that we were going to build a scenario where every type of learning and type of action has their own space to be, but softly overlaps with the immediate next one. You know that exercise for team building where everybody sits on everybody and then nobody falls kind of thing? Hopefully we can get there, but we're gonna need to try to rug each other as hard as possible, so we can actually build out of love to build the sort of white blood cells to deal with this.
That's why I hacked you all this morning. It's love.
You didn't find much there, did you?
Yeah, it didn't get me very far. I wanted to add one thing, which is this question, right? What is governance? Can a third grader understand governance? And I think one major thing that we did that we've never really talked about is that we don't ever use the word governance at Joke Race. We use the word contests. And if you think about what's the difference between a contest and governance, there is no difference. These are the exact same thing. Any sort of governance process is people picking the option that they want to go for, and that's just a contest for what is going to win. When you call it a contest, it sounds drastically different. It sounds like this is a social fun, game to play versus this very boring fixed thing.
Joke governance.
Yeah, joke governance, totally, right. And so but it's fascinating because contest also feels like it's a much bigger category than governance. Governance feels like a subcategory, but it's not. They're the same thing. And so, that's something that I think we just think a lot about. And to your point as well, who gets to participate in this? A contest is just a one-time community, and so that every time you do a contest, you can update that community however you want. The rewards pool for a contest is just a one-time treasury for a given decision. And so instead of having access to an entire treasury where you might make one mistake and rug the entire thing, you're only putting it up for that specific moment. And I think that's been really important for us to think that the future of DAOs is very much contest because it's a one-time community, and maybe you'll allow us the same people next time, but maybe you'll allow us totally different people next time.
Well, it's great,
whatever you want.
important concepts. Like, I'm going to use the forbidden word, but governance roughness in the mathematical sense. Letter D.
Let's go.
You fractalized it.
Yeah.
Right. So you're just putting super roughness to the edge of that. That the treasury is like iterating. It's like the day after tomorrow, kind of like you died, come up again, try again.
Well, and then you imagine the meta contest where it's like, pitch us 10 contests you want to do, we'll fund each of those, and then those will each get funded to do 10 more. So it's you can create fractal loops with this.
Last time we talked, I told you I was going to do homework on joke races and how to use them to build this. That didn't happen.
Didn't happen, but now you're stuck with me for an hour and a half. So I can slowly get into your brain.
The incentives have changed.
And I've been stuck with you since I interviewed you for House Party. I think like 3 years ago. And I was like, this guy's smart. God damn it.
And I was probably talking about how great token voting was back then. So.
You did change your.
Yeah, for a little bit.
Yeah, one of the other, I think interesting things, I know I keep talking about joke races, but I love to use the example of, Rehash, who obviously, is a Web3, podcast, so their community who holds NFTs and or has participated has the ability to either submit people that they want to see on the podcast the upcoming season and then vote on who actually gets on. This is also without obviously permissionless, so you can put Vitalik and there can be some social consensus around, kind of almost bullying the person to get onto the podcast. But that's an example of a contest where we're not saying governance because you don't actually need to incentivize anyone, right? It's very clear why someone would participate in that, and you're actually not even trying to get maybe even more participation because the people who show up to either submit people or vote on it are the ones that are listening. They actually care who is going to go into the content that they're consuming. They don't need a whole roadmap of why you should buy the NFT and all of the incentive structure that goes into it. Like you said, kids understand these things if we break it down to the basic concept of who's showing up, why do they care? Those are the people that should be making the decision in the first place, right? I don't want to incentivize people who aren't going to listen to my podcast to vote who's going to be on it. I don't care what you think. And maybe the people that didn't get voted on, someone has the opportunity to know that there's a market for a whole other group of guests, and so they can fork the entire thing, make Rehash 2, and go try and recruit the other speakers. So that's the other part of kind of just the open data that gets created on some of these platforms that we wouldn't have before, where a host might have to do a lot of work themselves to figure out what does my audience want to hear. So again, once we step outside of some of the financial incentives, it's so obvious, you almost don't want to overcomplicate what governance even means.
One thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and that is, I think, becoming more and more apparent in this discussion as well, is yes, this discussion, this panel, right, is about token-based governance, but I almost feel there's 2 steps before that is the starting question of not just how are we managing the mechanism of governance, but how are we creating the eligibility for governance, right? And one thing that's I have a few just kind of first principles in my brain that I have developed on my thoughts on DAOs, one of which is not everything should be a DAO, most things should not be a DAO. But the other is that in order to have a healthy and sustainable and strong and active DAO, the number one thing that the number one ingredient that you need above all else is intrinsically motivated participants. And so I think moving into a space of also thinking about, okay, how do we ensure that the people participating in any given, like forum of governance actually care about the thing that they're voting on, or it's relevant to them. And like David, I think the way that you've designed Joe Grace is a good example of this, because it allows for like more customization, more like modularity and composability of the mechanism of governance, but tailored and segmented to different audiences. Like baseline, like a very like known thing, like whether you're a VC, whether you're a marketer, whoever you are, like one well-known thing when you're building a business is about customer segmentation and asking who is the market for this, who is the target user, how do you segment those customers, and how do you market to each of those segments individually and go to market individually? And we're not thinking about that in governance yet. David is, but generally we're not. And so I wonder if that's almost a better question to ask than like, what are the better mechanisms than token-based voting? Maybe like, how do we create stronger and more sufficient eligibility systems for governance participation?
But I think LDF just like answered that question with saying like, I don't want somebody who doesn't care about my podcast to be able to decide who's on the podcast. I want the listeners and the people who comment and like and share and whatever. And kind of the idea for me, the core difference between this DAO model, ideally, and why a lot of people are fed up with token-based voting, is that we didn't want to build corporations that serve their shareholders first before their communities. And kind of the distinction being like, if I have a say about a podcast that I don't even care about, I just want to make it most popular, I think it's going to, get a lot of revenue from advertisement if we get Vitalik on it. I'm pushing for him. That's something different to if I'm a listener, and I think Parker would be great to have on because she's very much thinking about things that have been on the podcast before and could maybe further the conversation, and really making this distinction between we have a form of shareholder governance, but the shareholders can only be people who are directly affected or involved or participating in these communities, rather than outsiders who don't really care, who aren't listening, who aren't speaking, and who just had enough money to buy that voting share, because that's exactly what we have in our Web 2 platforms at the moment, apart from Elon. I don't think that's much better, but yeah, and thinking about that difference when building a business and thinking about who gets to govern, which to me, if I may just say, is very much aligned with cooperatives. And what they have been doing for hundreds of years in the analog world. Yeah.
Can I just, for the practice of being an asshole, attack the podcast thing just for a second? Or attack or compliment, actually, it depends on how you look at it. So that state where the people who care about your thing are actually participant and interested enough that it actually becomes a self-sustaining, that is the highest privilege. So the only fault I find in the way it was exposed is that it takes for granted how rare and how unlikely that is to be sustained for a very long time. So how rare it is to get there and how unlikely it is to be sustained for a very long time. We're all mini city-states. What's happening? What's wrong?
I was wondering,
it's at 4.
This is Amy's panel.
What time is the panel? Is it at 4?
I think it's now.
No, we started at 2:30.
Okay.
It's at 4.
Okay, sorry.
We
have 12 minutes.
I know, but if somebody misinterpreted something, it was probably my fault, so I don't want to touch them. So it's like every one of these things is like it's little Greek mini states, and it has its like temporary golden age, and then it kind of succumbs to grifters, into Lund, blah blah blah. And we do have a name for the Goodhart's law thing, blah blah. Token or no token, there are attack vectors. Actually, the problems that DAOs suffer are similar across the organizational problem in general. It's not just DAOs, right? I think one of the things that we have to get there, and I think people like Phelps are doing a great job at doing this just by the person that he is that we have to stop heuristicizing everything and having fucking representational thinking. I curse a lot. I'm saying fucking fuck. It's my birthday. I'll cry if I want to. But so
wait, it's your birthday?
No, it's not. Representational. It's almost though. Representational thinking and heuristicized binary is good is bad. It will take you nowhere. Will take you nowhere in your friendships, in your relationships, in your nothing. And I actually physically even avoid people and projects that communicate in good bad dynamics, and we it's allergic, like, and so yes, it's awesome to be there. It's probably not gonna last forever. Maybe you should be building. Yeah, it doesn't need to. DAOs can die. Actually, Sky's talk, the ending at the mapper stage is about DAOs dying, and one DAO that was under that type of attack and then decided to dissolve in a clumsy way, but dissolved. It's the only. Anyway, I'm digressing at this point. Yeah.
That's heartbreaking, but it's like necessary, I feel like.
So the external motivations thing is interesting. I think there's an underlying question for this whole panel, which is like, are we talking about the problem being hyperfinancialization or not? And I would actually take a stance that hyperfinancialization is not the issue with token-based governance. And I'm actually totally in favor of hyperfinancialization as a motivation that can be really powerful. It's just not the only one. Like the way I think about it a lot is like poker, right? If you go and you see people who are playing poker, some people are there because they want to win, and they're just there for the monetary privilege of winning and the money that they're going to make. Some are there for the social status. They want to look really good to their friends by winning, right? And they don't care about the money. Or sorry, that reputational status. And then some are there for the social piece, which is they just like playing the game with each other, and they just like the process, whether or not they win, right? And so you have these three different pieces of reputation, social, financial. And at a given, poker's a really powerful game because it can appeal to all three of those. And you'll have people at the exact same table who are there for different reasons or a different combination of these. And so what I think about a lot is like, I'm not against leveraging, financial incentives, like having awards and rewards and like having that be a thing that people compete for. I think it'd be really effective in getting people at least compensated for thinking more deeply about their time, or thinking more deeply, in their time. But it's not the only one. And it's like, how do you also have like the social piece and the reputational piece? The reputational piece is like, that's a massive unlock of blockchains that we still don't realize, as we have some projects in the space working on here. Like, the moment that your attestations from a hackathon you did on chain because Vitalik voted for your project and he liked it even though you didn't win, the moment that unlocks you an airdrop because people know you're a legitimate builder, everyone's going to be so angry that they've been building data in a Web 2 siloed way instead of on Web 3 where it's going to be able to leverage the massive opportunities. So the reputation piece seems easy to understand now, even though we haven't seen it in action yet, because there's been no way to build reputation besides these very rote financial transactions of how much liquidity you've provided, which again just correlates to how rich you are. So I think like that's going to be the next big piece we see. The really challenging one is the social piece. Like, how are you using on-chain to let people socialize better with each other and build better relationships with each other? And I think like, being able to build collaborative economies, even there, that's where financialization can be interesting, because it's like, well, what if you could swap votes with each other? What if there's a way that you could guarantee that you traded votes, across different contests or governance process? Like, do we hate that because that's collusion and that's corruption? Or do we love that because that's building really powerful social networks for people to collaborate and work together better? And I think like that's going to be kind of the final piece. It's going to be a long time before you can do things socially as well on blockchains as you can on off-chain, but it'll happen. And it's going to be really interesting to think about, like, what are the compromises we want to make there to build better social engagement too.
I maybe just want to briefly disagree with 2 points that each of you made, or like one each. The first one was the idea of like, yes, this the users are the governors and the shareholders and everything. That's the ideal. That's a utopia. That idea isn't gonna survive or is unlikely to last very long. And implicit in that statement, what I understood is it's not going to be well funded, right? It's not going to be a successful business. And I just wanted to drop there this idea. So first of all, I think it's very dangerous to have the idea that economic power immediately translates into political power in all spaces, not just the DAO space. I think, again, when we talk about token-based governance, like the fact that we don't have two-tier token-based governance yet in normal corporate shareholder governance, it's the most normal thing that I can give a company my money and be an investor, doesn't mean I get to say what they produce next, right? So this sort of idea there, just as a counterpoint, and the pessimism of we have to allow this economic power that probably will translate into political power in DAOs, I would very much push back on. And the other thing, maybe slightly related to the idea of hyper-financialization, give incentives and rewards for everything. Like, I think, yes, that's great, but also knowing, especially when you say the hardest part is the social layer, I think deeply rooted in the social layer is the idea of humans making themselves vulnerable towards each other. And once there's something where I rely on LDF for, and then she comes through, and I'm like, hey, that's really cool, I appreciate it, and then I'll invite you again, or we go and do something else. So there is an aspect of vulnerability that happens in social relationship building. What we want to do with technology and economic incentives is reduce vulnerability overall. So I think there is something that is deeply contradictory there. And I do want to say that the hyper-financialization, ideally cool, but if I'm cooking dinner for friends and they start paying me for the time I worked on that dinner, that friendship doesn't, even if I've had money and my dinner, it doesn't feel right anymore, and we're really destroying something. And to be careful of which spaces we're letting these incentive systems and these technologies in, because they're also undermining something that we already know how to do in a very different way.
But you should bring a bottle of wine over.
But even if you don't,
we have 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes left.
We have 3 minutes
left. There was some assumptions in your review that you actually covered, that they were assumptions that we're gonna have to resolve in the relational space, because I'm not gonna be able to do here. I just wanna let you know that there was some things that actually were understood completely the other way around, and maybe it's my fault. But I'm gonna give the microphone to Parker because we have to close it off because the next panel is gonna start.
LDF, do you want to say something?
Go ahead.
All right. We have 3 minutes left. Rather than give like a little whatever sentimental closeout speech, let's just go in a line and say in 1 to 2 sentences or less, what are the most impactful, actionable next steps that we can take or that we want to call others to take to improve some of the grievances that have been raised today. I'll start. I think one very simple but useful idea would be to create a very public-facing repository, just like an FAQ of different governance mechanisms that exist, as well as actionable links to how to get involved in these. And I know some of these exist already. And I'm wondering how can we bring more visibility to them, as well as encourage or create some kind of system for DAOs to continuously document and share research or just documentation on what governance systems they're using and what patterns and outcomes they're seeing with those.
Mine is similar to her, but that for learning disabled or ADHD people like me. So visualizing governance, steerability and cybernetics of governance is, I think, it's the biggest weak spot. It's like the easiest low-hanging fruit, maybe because I have vision on how to do it and I just haven't done it for 2 years.
Create cool allow lists, I would say. It would be really good for us to have some go-to kind of communities that can be permissioned, allow listed, change, modified for everyone to work off of, to be like, hey, I'm trying to, reach all the swimmers in the space. Where do I get that data, and what's the list of on-chain addresses of swimmers in the space that I can just boom permission and suddenly they're my community and I've brought them in and I'm getting their say.
For me, I think it's despite the fact that many of us are upset with Web 2 and maybe the nation-state concept as it is right now, think about all the areas of life where we are actually quite good at governance and governing. And let's not try and get rid of what we're good at in Web 3, but rather think around how can we enhance it with these new technical primitives.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was gonna say is like we need to use these tools, right? Like we make decisions all day, every day. We decided what hotels we were gonna stay at when we came here, what dates we were gonna come, what events we were gonna show up to, who we wanna speak with on panels. Like we are coordinating all day, every day, even if it's not for a DAO. And so the more we can, test and break and push these tools where the stakes aren't so high and we actually do have a lot of latent trust with each other, I think we're going to go a lot further, a lot faster. Awesome. Thank you, Parker.